The past has a way of lingering in the air, thick like dust settling in forgotten corners, whispering through creaking floorboards and rustling through old papers. As I stood inside my late uncle's cluttered shop, surrounded by shelves sagging under the weight of antique trinkets and forgotten relics, I felt the ghosts of a lifetime pressing in around me. The scent of aged wood and ink-stained parchment filled my lungs as my fingers traced the edge of an old ledger, its spine cracked from years of use. Behind me, my cousins, dressed in designer clothes, their hands manicured and their eyes gleaming with superiority, laughed openly, their voices sharp as broken glass. "Enjoy your inheritance of junk," my cousin Michael sneered, his arm draped around his sister Claire's shoulders in a show of camaraderie. "We got the mansion and the money, but I suppose it makes sense." Uncle Gerald always did have a soft spot for lost causes. Claire smirked, her red-painted lips curving in amusement as she tilted her head, sizing me up the way one might examine a stray dog. "Well, at least you'll have something to keep you busy while we're off enjoying what really matters." I knew what they wanted. They wanted to see my disappointment, my regret, my longing for what they had claimed as their own. They wanted me to break under the weight of injustice, to plead, to argue, to demand that things be made right. But I had learned long ago that the greatest power one could wield in the face of arrogance was indifference. So I smiled. I let the warmth of it reach my eyes, as if they had just handed me a gift rather than a burden. "Thank you," I said simply, my voice even, my posture unshaken. "I wouldn't have wanted it any other way." Michael snorted, clearly unimpressed by my lack of outrage, while Claire tossed her hair and let out a sigh of exaggerated boredom. "Well, enjoy your treasures, Amelia," she drawled before linking arms with her brother and striding toward the door, their laughter echoing long after the bell jingled on their way out. I exhaled slowly, turning back to the chaos before me, my hands settling on my hips as I took in the sheer magnitude of what lay ahead. Dust motes swirled in the golden glow of the evening sun filtering through the high windows, illuminating stacks of forgotten books, glass display cases filled with strange artifacts, and cabinets with drawers overflowing with yellowed papers. My uncle's shop, Wellington's Curiosities, had been a place of mystery and wonder for as long as I could remember. Growing up, I had spent summers curled up in the corner with ancient tomes, listening to Uncle Gerald's stories about the relics he collected. He had always spoken as if each object held a story waiting to be told, a secret waiting to be uncovered. And now, standing amidst the remnants of his life, I couldn't help but feel that he had left something behind for me to find. That night, with the shop finally locked and the silence of solitude wrapping around me, I began the slow process of making sense of my inheritance. Dusting off old shelves, sorting through stacks of ledgers, and cataloging inventory soon became a mindless rhythm, until, while shifting a pile of notebooks off his old oak desk, I found something unusual. A key. It wasn't the kind of key that opened an ordinary lock. It was heavy, cast in tarnished brass, its surface worn smooth as if handled countless times over the years. Alongside it, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age and creased from years of being tucked away. My breath hitched as I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the familiar scrawl of my uncle's handwriting. "Amelia, if you are reading this, then fate has brought you exactly where you need to be. Do not be fooled by what they left you. What truly matters has always been hidden beneath the surface. Look behind the bookshelf. Trust no one. Gerald." My heart pounded against my ribs as I turned, my gaze locking onto the enormous mahogany bookshelf that dominated the far wall of the office. I had spent years sitting beside it as a child, listening to my uncle's voice weave tales of adventure and mystery, never once considering that it might hold secrets of its own. Slowly, cautiously, I approached, running my fingers along the worn spines of countless books until my hand brushed against something that didn't belong, a slight groove in the wood, almost imperceptible to the eye. With a steadying breath, I pressed against it. A faint click echoed in the stillness, and then, before my eyes, the bookshelf groaned and shifted, revealing a narrow passageway leading into darkness. I swallowed hard, gripping the key tightly in my palm as a chill crept up my spine. Uncle Gerald had left me more than a dusty shop and a collection of forgotten trinkets. He had left me a mystery, and I was about to find out exactly what lay hidden behind the door. The human heart has a strange way of recognizing truth before the mind can fully comprehend it, a silent whisper beneath the noise of logic. As I stood before the secret passage concealed behind my late uncle's bookshelf, my pulse drummed a steady rhythm of anticipation, my breath shallow as my fingers tightened around the weight of the brass key. I had spent years believing that Uncle Gerald was nothing more than an eccentric collector of forgotten things, a man who found beauty in the discarded and meaning in the mundane. But now, staring into the yawning darkness beyond the threshold, I realized that I had barely scratched the surface of the life he had truly lived. The passage was narrow, its walls rough with age, the scent of old wood and forgotten time pressing in around me as I hesitated at the entrance. The key in my palm was warm now, the metal absorbing the heat of my skin, as if it held a life of its own. I had a choice: turn back, lock the shop, pretend that my inheritance was nothing more than a collection of antiques and dusty records, or step forward into whatever secret Uncle Gerald had left waiting in the dark. I exhaled slowly, pushing aside the hesitation curling at the edges of my thoughts, and stepped inside. The air was cool, untouched by the heat of the summer night pressing against the shop's windows, and as I moved deeper into the passage, my fingers skimmed the uneven surface of the walls, tracing the subtle grooves and ridges of aged wood. The faint glow of the streetlights behind me faded with each step, leaving me wrapped in darkness, my senses sharpening in the absence of sight. Then, just as my heart began to race with the uncertainty of blindly wandering forward, my hand met something cold and metallic, an old lantern, hanging from a rusted hook embedded in the wall. With trembling fingers, I lifted it, my free hand searching the nearby shelves until I found a matchbox tucked neatly into a groove in the wood. Uncle Gerald had planned for this, had anticipated that one day I would find my way here. With a flick of my wrist, the match ignited, its glow flickering wildly before catching the lantern's wick, casting long, wavering shadows along the passage walls. The light revealed the depth of the hidden corridor, the walls lined with shelves packed tightly with weathered books, old maps, and boxes labeled in my uncle's elegant script. The sight sent a shiver down my spine, not from fear, but from the eerie realization that this was no ordinary storage space. This was a vault of knowledge, deliberately hidden beneath the ordinary world, waiting for the right hands to uncover its secrets. I ran my fingers along the spine of one of the books, the leather cracked with age, its title barely legible beneath the dust. Cartography of the Lost. The name sent a pulse of curiosity through me, but before I could open it, my gaze caught something else, a heavy wooden door at the end of the passage, its surface carved with intricate symbols, its keyhole perfectly matching the shape of the brass key in my grip. My breath hitched as I stepped closer, raising the lantern to illuminate the details of the carvings. Symbols I didn't recognize swirled together in an elaborate pattern, geometric shapes woven seamlessly with what appeared to be ancient script. The wood beneath my fingertips was smooth despite its age, the patterns so precisely etched that I couldn't help but wonder if my uncle had carved them himself or if this door had existed long before his time. I hesitated, the weight of the key suddenly heavier in my palm, a silent question pressing against my ribs. Was I truly meant to open this door? But the answer had been decided long before I ever set foot in this passage. Uncle Gerald had left me the key, left me the note, left me the only piece of his world that mattered. He had trusted me with something greater than trinkets and forgotten antiques, and now it was time to step forward into the unknown. With a steadying breath, I slid the key into the lock. A deep click echoed through the passage, the vibration humming beneath my fingertips as the door shuddered slightly, as if it had been waiting for this very moment. Slowly, I pressed against the wood, the hinges groaning in protest before yielding to my touch. The room beyond was vast, far larger than I had expected, the lantern's glow barely reaching the farthest corners where shadows clung like forgotten whispers. My first thought was that this had once been a hidden study, a place where my uncle had retreated from the world, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was something much more. The walls were lined with shelves, filled not with books, but with artifacts, golden compasses, aged scrolls, small chests bound in iron, and intricate mechanisms I couldn't begin to understand. In the center of the room stood a large wooden desk, its surface scattered with open journals, handwritten notes, and a single object resting atop a worn leather map. A small, ornate box. I stepped closer, the floorboards beneath me creaking softly as I reached for the journal nearest to me, my uncle's familiar handwriting filling the pages. If you are reading this, Amelia, then it means the time has come. This is not just a collection of old curiosities. It is a legacy. A secret that has been passed down through generations, waiting for the right hands to uncover it. There is more to this world than what we have been told, more than what history allows us to believe. The key was only the beginning. My fingers tightened around the pages, my heartbeat thrumming in my ears as I looked down at the small box resting atop the leather map. My uncle's words played over and over in my mind. The key was only the beginning. Slowly, I reached out, my fingers grazing the cool surface of the box as a strange sensation rippled through me, something deep and electric, like a current shifting beneath my skin. Whatever Uncle Gerald had hidden here, it was never meant for my cousins. It had always been meant for me. And I was about to discover exactly why. There are moments in life when time seems to hold its breath, when the weight of an unknown truth presses down so heavily that the air itself feels charged with anticipation. Standing in my late uncle's secret chamber, surrounded by relics that had been hidden from the world for years, I could feel that weight settling over my shoulders, thick and undeniable. The small ornate box resting atop the worn leather map seemed to radiate an almost imperceptible hum beneath my fingertips, as though it recognized that its time of secrecy had finally come to an end. I swallowed against the dryness in my throat, my fingers hesitating over the delicate latch, torn between the desire to uncover the truth and the lingering fear of what it might reveal. Uncle Gerald had always spoken in riddles, his stories laced with half-truths and mysteries wrapped in clever misdirection. But this was something different. He had left me a key, a message, a door to something greater than the trinkets and antiques my cousins had so easily dismissed. With a slow, steadying breath, I pressed the latch. A soft click echoed through the silent chamber, followed by the smooth glide of the lid lifting to reveal its contents. At first glance, it seemed almost disappointingly simple. No piles of gold, no elaborate mechanisms, no ancient manuscript waiting to unveil the secrets of the universe. Just a single, folded piece of parchment, brittle with age, and a small silver pendant resting beside it, its delicate chain tangled like an afterthought. Frowning, I picked up the parchment, careful not to damage the fragile fibers as I unfolded it, my eyes scanning the words written in my uncle's unmistakable scrawl. Amelia, if you have found this, then you are ready to learn what I could never tell you in life. The pendant beside this letter is not merely an heirloom, it is a key, much like the one that led you here. But unlike the brass key that opened this door, this one does not unlock something made of wood and iron. It unlocks a path that very few have ever walked, a path that I spent my life protecting. I could not carry it any longer, but I always knew you would be the one to continue what I could not. I stared at the words, my pulse pounding in my ears as a strange sensation prickled at the base of my spine. A key? A path? What had Uncle Gerald been involved in, and why had he chosen to keep it from me until now? My fingers instinctively reached for the pendant, lifting it from the box and untangling the chain as the silver caught the lantern's flickering glow. It was unlike any piece of jewelry I had ever seen, small, circular, with intricate etchings along the edges that reminded me of constellations, though none that I recognized. The moment my skin made contact with the cool metal, a sudden, sharp sensation shot through me, not pain, exactly, but a pulse of something other, like an unseen current shifting beneath my skin. My breath hitched, the air around me growing noticeably heavier as if the very fabric of the room had changed in some imperceptible way. For a long moment, I remained still, the pendant resting against my palm, its weight far greater than it should have been for something so small. My uncle's words burned in my mind, circling like a puzzle I had yet to piece together. What path was he referring to? What had he spent his life protecting? And why had he chosen me, of all people, to inherit something so deliberately hidden? Determined to find more answers, I turned my attention back to the desk, my hands moving with newfound urgency as I sifted through the scattered journals and notes that had once belonged to my uncle. Pages filled with sketches of maps that didn't match any geographic locations I recognized, passages written in languages I couldn't decipher, symbols etched in the margins that seemed to repeat across multiple documents. Then, near the bottom of the pile, I found it. A letter addressed to me, sealed with a wax emblem I didn't recognize, pressed into parchment that looked far older than my uncle's other writings. My fingers trembled slightly as I broke the seal, unfolding the crisp paper and letting my eyes absorb the message within. Amelia, if you have come this far, then you have already begun to understand that the world is not as simple as it appears. The pendant you now hold is more than an object, it is a marker, a symbol of something much greater than bloodlines and inheritance. I was a guardian, not of wealth or land, but of knowledge, of history that has been erased, of truths that were buried long before our time. This shop, this hidden chamber, everything I have left behind was meant to lead you to the next step. But I must warn you, once you choose to follow this path, there is no turning back. If you wish to walk away, lock the door behind you and forget this place. But if you are willing to seek what has long been lost, then follow the coordinates in my journal. The answers await you there. My breath left me in a slow, measured exhale as I lowered the letter, my mind spinning with 1,000 questions that had no immediate answers. A guardian of knowledge? A hidden history erased from time? This was no ordinary inheritance, no mere family secret. Uncle Gerald had been part of something far larger than I had ever imagined, something that had shaped his entire life and, for reasons I was only beginning to understand, he had chosen me to carry it forward. Swallowing the rising tide of uncertainty, I reached for the journal he had referenced, flipping through the pages until I found a set of coordinates scrawled in ink, accompanied by a note in his unmistakable script. Begin where it all was lost. Find what they left behind. The truth is waiting. The truth. I looked down at the pendant still clutched in my hand, feeling its silent weight against my palm, and for the first time since stepping into this hidden chamber, I knew without a doubt what I had to do. This was never just an inheritance. It was a calling, and I was ready to follow wherever it led. Some choices in life are made with careful deliberation, weighed against logic and reason, balanced between risk and reward. Other choices, the ones that truly change everything, are made in a single breath, with no time to second guess, only the undeniable pull of something greater than understanding. As I stood in my late uncle's hidden chamber, his letter trembling slightly in my hands, I knew I had already made my decision before I had even finished reading his final words. The coordinates stared back at me from the worn pages of his journal, ink faded, but still clear, a destination I did not yet understand, but one that now belonged to me. My heart pounded against my ribs as my fingers traced the numbers, committing them to memory even as my mind raced with the implications of what lay ahead. Uncle Gerald had not merely left me an inheritance, he had left me a path to something that had remained buried, something that had required decades of secrecy. Whatever truth he had uncovered in life, he had shielded it with such precision that, even in death, only the right hands could reach for it. I lifted the silver pendant once more, its weight now feeling strangely familiar, its surface cool against my fingertips, the etchings glinting under the lantern's flickering glow. He had called it a key, though it did not fit any lock I had ever seen. If I was to understand what it truly unlocked, I would have to follow the trail he had left behind. I exhaled slowly, bracing myself for the task ahead, before tucking the pendant securely beneath my shirt and folding the letter carefully, slipping it into the inside pocket of my jacket. With deliberate movements, I gathered the journal, the parchment maps, and a few of the smaller artifacts that seemed significant, fitting them into my messenger bag before extinguishing the lantern's flame. The room plunged into darkness, the only sound the steady rhythm of my breath as I turned back toward the passage, my hands finding the grooves in the bookshelf that would conceal this secret once more. As the hidden door clicked shut behind me, I felt a strange finality settle in my bones, as though I had crossed an invisible threshold, and there was no longer any way to return to the life I had known before tonight. By the time I stepped out of Wellington's Curiosities and into the cool night air, the streets were quiet, the hum of the city softened beneath the weight of the late hour. My breath curled in the crisp breeze as I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers moving swiftly as I entered the coordinates into a map search, my pulse quickening as the screen displayed a location miles away from the city. An isolated stretch of land in the middle of nowhere. My uncle had never mentioned owning property outside of the shop, had never spoken of any remote getaway or hidden retreat. If this place held the answers he had so carefully concealed, then I had no choice but to see it for myself. I glanced up toward the sky, the moon hanging low against the darkness, the stars scattered in an unfamiliar pattern, as though even the heavens were shifting to mark the path ahead. My hands curled into fists at my sides, a silent promise to myself that no matter what lay waiting at the end of this trail, I would not turn back. My car was parked just a block away, tucked between the empty storefronts lining the quiet street, and as I slid behind the wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The sensation prickled at the base of my neck, an almost imperceptible awareness that something, or someone, was lingering just beyond my vision. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel as I cast a slow glance across the street, my gaze scanning the empty sidewalks, the darkened windows, the silent hum of street lamps flickering in the distance. Nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the unease curling in my gut, a whisper of warning that I had already set something in motion that could not be undone. With a steadying breath, I turned the key in the ignition, the low rumble of the engine breaking the silence as I pulled onto the road, leaving the familiar streets of my city behind. The highway stretched before me, long and empty, a dark ribbon winding into the unknown. The further I drove, the more the city lights faded behind me, replaced by vast stretches of open land, the occasional silhouette of trees against the distant glow of the moon. The roads grew narrower, the signs less frequent, until eventually, even the GPS faltered, the smalled, on my screen hovering over an expanse of unmarked terrain. I was close now. The coordinates led me off the main road, down a narrow dirt path that had long been abandoned, the gravel crunching beneath my tires as the trees pressed in on either side. My headlights carved a path through the darkness, illuminating the dust swirling in the air, the shadows stretching in long, unfamiliar shapes. And then, just as the weight of uncertainty threatened to settle over me, I saw it. A small, wrought iron gate, rusted from time, standing alone at the end of the path, its frame barely visible beneath the tangle of overgrown vines. Beyond it, a narrow trail disappeared into the trees, the outline of a structure barely visible in the distance. I pulled the car to a stop, my fingers lingering on the keys as I stared at the gate, my heart hammering against my ribs. My uncle had sent me here for a reason, had left me breadcrumbs leading to something buried beneath years of secrecy. Steeling myself, I grabbed my bag, slinging it over my shoulder before stepping out into the still night air, the ground firm beneath my boots as I approached the gate. The metal was cool beneath my touch, the vines dry and brittle as I pushed them aside, revealing an old lock tarnished with rust. My breath hitched as my fingers instinctively reached for the silver pendant beneath my shirt, the weight of it pressing against my skin like a silent reminder. A key. Swallowing hard, I lifted the pendant, fitting it into the lock with a slow, deliberate motion. A click echoed through the night, low and final, as the gate creaked open before me. Beyond it, the path stretched into the unknown. And there was no turning back now. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again, no matter how much one might wish to turn back or pretend they had never taken that first step. As I stood at the rusted gate, the silver pendant still dangling from the ancient lock, the weight of that realization settled deep in my bones, as if the very air around me had thickened with the presence of something unseen. The path beyond the gate stretched into the darkness, barely illuminated by the glow of my flashlight, winding through thick trees that rustled with the whispers of the wind. I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening around the strap of my bag as I stepped forward, pushing the gate open just wide enough to slip through. The hinges groaned in protest, their rusty lament swallowed by the vast quiet of the night, the sound sending a shiver down my spine as I pressed onward. Each step felt heavier than the last, the dirt beneath my boots uneven, the scent of damp earth and aged wood filling my lungs as the trees closed in around me. The further I went, the more I noticed how deliberately concealed the trail had been, as though someone had intentionally allowed nature to reclaim what had once been a well-worn path. Twigs snapped beneath my feet, the distant hoot of an owl breaking the silence, yet it was not the sounds of the wilderness that unnerved me, it was the sheer stillness beyond them. The unnatural quiet that seemed to press against my senses like an unseen presence watching from the shadows. And then, just as I began to wonder whether I had misunderstood my uncle's instructions, I saw it. A structure loomed ahead, partially obscured by the overgrowth, its silhouette stark against the faint glow of the moon. It was not the grand estate or hidden bunker my imagination had conjured, but something far humbler, a small stone cottage, its walls weathered with age, its roof sagging slightly under the weight of neglect. Moss crept up its foundation, vines twisting along its sides, yet despite its forgotten state, the door remained intact, its wooden frame solid and unyielding, as though it had been waiting all these years for someone to return. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, my flashlight beam sweeping across the door, revealing the same intricate carvings that had adorned the hidden chamber in my uncle's shop. My fingers traced the patterns, their grooves worn smooth from time, yet still unmistakable in their meaning. This place had been protected, sealed against those who did not know what they were looking for. And I had the key. With trembling hands, I lifted the pendant once more, searching for a keyhole within the carvings, my pulse quickening as I found a small, almost imperceptible indentation near the center of the design. I pressed the pendant against it, the metal fitting perfectly, the cold surface warming beneath my touch as a low click echoed through the air. The door shifted slightly, the seal breaking after years of abandonment, a rush of stale air escaping from within, thick with the scent of old parchment, earth, and something else, something deeper, something older. I hesitated only for a moment before stepping inside. The air within the cottage was dense, untouched by time, the weight of centuries pressing down on the space like an unseen force. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing walls lined with shelves overflowing with books, maps, and aged scrolls, each one meticulously stored, as if my uncle, or whoever had come before him, had been preserving something far more valuable than mere knowledge. A large wooden desk stood at the center of the room, its surface littered with open journals, quills, and glass vials filled with inky residue, as though the previous occupant had left in haste, abandoning their work mid-thought. My gaze swept across the space, my breath hitching as I noticed the symbols carved into the stone floor beneath me, their intricate patterns forming a massive, circular design that spanned nearly the entire room. It was not a simple aesthetic choice. This was something else entirely. Something deliberate. A shiver ran down my spine as I stepped closer, my fingers brushing over the carved lines, the sensation beneath my skin eerily similar to the one I had felt when I first touched the pendant. It was as though the very room was humming with a silent energy, waiting, watching. Swallowing hard, I turned my attention to the desk, my hands moving instinctively toward the nearest journal, its worn leather cover nearly crumbling at my touch. The pages within were filled with my uncle's handwriting, his familiar script curving along the parchment in hurried, uneven strokes, as though he had been racing against time to document something before it was lost. I scanned the words, my breath catching as I pieced together their meaning. The order has existed longer than recorded history, protecting what must not fall into the wrong hands. Knowledge is more powerful than any weapon, and in the wrong hands, it can undo everything. I flipped through the pages, my fingers shaking as more of the truth revealed itself. The pendant is not just a key, it is a marker, a link to those who came before us, those who swore to guard the truth. The maps lead to what remains, but they cannot decipher themselves. Only those who bear the marker can see beyond what others perceive. I paused, my mind spinning, my heart hammering against my ribs as I looked down at the pendant hanging from my neck. A key, a marker, a connection to something far older than my uncle, older than my family, perhaps older than recorded time itself. My fingers curled around the pendant, the metal warm against my skin, my thoughts racing with questions I could not yet answer. What had my uncle been protecting? What had he meant by the order? And if he had been the last of them, what did that make me? The sudden sound of movement outside sent a jolt of fear through my veins, the snap of a branch breaking the stillness of the night, the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching the cottage. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, my mind screaming at me to move, to hide, to do anything but stand there waiting for whatever or whoever was coming. This was never just an inheritance. This was a secret that someone else had been waiting for me to uncover. And I was no longer alone. There are moments in life when fear becomes secondary to the certainty that everything is about to change, when hesitation fades beneath the sheer weight of knowing that the next decision will shape the course of everything that follows. As I stood in my late uncle's hidden study, my fingers still curled tightly around the silver pendant resting against my skin, I knew with absolute clarity that I had run out of time. The footsteps outside were slow, deliberate, each step crunching against the forest floor, the sound muffled only slightly by the thick cover of fallen leaves. Whoever was out there was not lost, was not wandering aimlessly through the woods, was not some stray traveler stumbling upon this forgotten place by accident. They were coming for something specific, something buried beneath years of secrecy, something they had likely been waiting for me to uncover. And I had done exactly that. I exhaled slowly, forcing my pulse to steady even as adrenaline surged through my veins, my mind racing through the possibilities of who might be standing just beyond that door. Had my cousins grown suspicious and followed me, hoping to claim a share of whatever they believed I had found? Had some stranger, watching from the shadows, tracked me here, drawn by my uncle's carefully concealed knowledge? Or, far more likely, had Uncle Gerald's enemies, whoever they were, been waiting all this time for his successor to reveal themselves? The journal on the desk was still open, the inked words glaring up at me like a final warning, a reminder that my uncle had not been a simple collector of forgotten relics. He had been something far more, something dangerous, something secret, something that had demanded a lifetime of careful deception to protect. And now, that burden belonged to me. The footsteps stopped just beyond the door. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating, stretching long enough that I could hear my own breath echo in my ears, could feel the steady thump of my pulse in my fingertips. My body screamed at me to move, to run, to disappear into the night before I was caught in something I did not yet understand, but some deeper instinct kept me rooted in place, waiting. Then, 3 sharp knocks against the wooden door. Not frantic, not uncertain, measured, deliberate. They knew I was inside. I swallowed hard, forcing my shaking fingers to close the journal, slipping it into my bag alongside the maps and loose pages I had gathered, my movements quick but careful. If this was a confrontation, I would not walk away empty-handed. If I had to run, I would not leave behind the last remnants of my uncle's secrets. The knocking came again, this time slower, as though whoever was on the other side had all the time in the world, as though they knew that eventually, I would have to face them. My gaze flickered to the pendant, the silver warm now, almost pulsing against my skin, as if it too sensed the presence beyond that door. Whatever my uncle had entrusted to me, whatever legacy he had woven into the secrecy of this place, it was not just a collection of forgotten knowledge. It was something much more than that, something alive. I took a slow, measured breath and stepped forward. With one final glance at the darkened room around me, I reached for the door. And I opened it. The figure standing on the threshold was not what I had expected. A man, Perhaps in his late 40s, his presence imposing despite the neutral expression on his face, his sharp eyes locking onto mine the moment the door swung open. His features were lean, his movements controlled, his dark coat blending almost seamlessly into the night behind him, but it was not his appearance that sent a chill down my spine. It was the way he looked at me. Not with curiosity, not with suspicion, with recognition. As expected, he murmured, his voice low, almost amused, though his posture remained tense, unreadable. "You found the key, and you followed it." I didn't answer, my grip tightening on the doorframe as my mind scrambled to piece together who he was, how he knew about the pendant, and what exactly he had been expecting of me. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the pulse hammering at my throat. "And how did you find this place?" A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips, though it never reached his eyes. "I knew your uncle, Amelia," he said, tilting his head slightly, as though assessing my reaction, gauging whether I was ready to hear whatever truth he had come to deliver. "And I knew that when the time came, he would choose someone to continue his work. It seems he chose you." The weight of his words pressed against my ribs, heavy with the implications I had only just begun to unravel. "My uncle never mentioned you," I said cautiously, studying him for any sign of deception, any flicker of dishonesty in the way he held himself. "Gerald didn't mention a great many things," the man replied, his gaze flickering past me toward the interior of the cottage, as if recalling some long-buried memory. "But he prepared you for this, didn't he? The journal, the maps, the pendant, you've already begun to see the pieces falling into place." I hesitated, uncertainty warring with the undeniable sense that he knew far more than I did, that he held answers to questions I had only just begun to ask. "What did my uncle protect?" I asked, my voice quieter now, my grip loosening just slightly as I studied his face, searching for the truth in the shadows beneath his sharp features. He exhaled slowly, as though weighing his next words carefully, as though he knew that whatever he said next would determine whether I trusted him or ran from him. "Something that should never have been forgotten," he said, his voice quieter now, no longer holding that edge of amusement, only something closer to reverence. "Something that those in power have spent centuries trying to erase. Gerald was one of the last to guard it." His eyes flickered to the pendant resting against my collarbone, his gaze sharp, unreadable. "And now, whether you intended it or not, that responsibility has passed to you." A heavy silence stretched between us, the weight of his words settling over me like an unseen force, a choice I had not known I would have to make now standing before me like a threshold I could not ignore. I could walk away. I could return to my old life, let the mysteries of my uncle's past remain buried beneath the dust of forgotten history. Or I could step forward, into the unknown, into whatever truth he had spent his life protecting. The pendant pulsed again against my skin, warm, alive. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that there had never been a choice at all. I met the stranger's gaze, my breath steady now, the weight of my uncle's final message burning in my mind. "Begin where it all was lost. Find what they left behind. The truth is waiting." I lifted my chin, the words leaving my lips without hesitation. "Tell me everything." And with that, the door to my old life closed forever.